when 11-year-old Dakota Martinez stood at pump number 4 of a rural New Mexico truck stop at 9:47 on a Tuesday night in late September, watching a silver sedan pull away with brake lights that disappeared into the desert darkness. She understood with sudden clarity that her stepfather had just abandoned her. She'd suspected it was coming during the 7-hour drive from Albuquerque, had noticed how he kept checking his mirrors, how he'd refused to let her bring her phone into the gas station bathroom, how his new girlfriend in the passenger seat had stopped pretending to be nice somewhere around mile marker 200. But knowing something might happen and watching it actually happen were different experiences entirely, and Dakota felt the weight of that difference settle onto her shoulders as she stood alone under fluorescent lights with exactly $4.37 in her pocket and no idea what to do next. The Love's travel stop sat at the junction of Highway 60 and a 2-lane road that led to absolutely nowhere, one of those places that existed purely because people needed fuel and bathrooms on long drives through empty country. At this hour on a Tuesday, the parking lot held maybe a dozen vehicles, most of them big rigs whose drivers were sleeping in their cabs or sitting inside the attached diner drinking coffee that tasted like regret. Dakota had been to this exact truck stop twice before, on visits to her grandmother in Truth or Consequences, which meant she knew the layout, knew which bathroom stall had a working lock, knew that the vending machines near the entrance were older than she was and sometimes ate your money without giving you anything in return. She also knew that this place was 94 miles from her grandmother's house and 160 miles from her mother's apartment in Albuquerque, and that neither of those people knew where she was right now because her stepfather Rick had told her mother they were going to a Dodgers game in Phoenix and would be back Thursday, a lie that Dakota had been instructed not to contradict if she wanted to see her little brother again. She stood very still at that gas pump, her small backpack heavy on one shoulder, wearing the jean jacket her grandmother had given her last Christmas and the sneakers that were getting too small but that her mother couldn't afford to replace yet. And she made herself think clearly despite the panic trying to crawl up her throat. First fact, Rick wasn't coming back. He'd been looking for an excuse to get rid of her ever since he married her mother 14 months ago, had made it clear in 100 small cruelties that she was an inconvenience in his new life. And tonight, when she'd asked if they could stop so she could use the bathroom and get a snack, he'd seen his opportunity and taken it. Second fact, she had $4 and some change, no phone, and no way to call anyone, even if she had one, because she didn't have her mother's number memorized, just saved in a phone that was currently sitting on Rick's dashboard, heading west at 75 miles per hour. Third fact, the truck stop employees would call the police if she went inside and told them she'd been abandoned, and the police would call child services, and child services would take her somewhere that wasn't home, and her mother, who was already barely holding things together, would lose custody of both kids. And her little brother, Mateo, who was only 5, would end up in the system because Rick would disappear, and their mother couldn't handle 2 kids alone, and Dakota had already failed at protecting Mateo from Rick's anger, so she couldn't let this destroy what was left of their family. She was working through these facts with the kind of cold logic that comes from growing up too fast when she noticed the motorcycles. 3 of them pulled up to the diesel pumps on the far side of the lot, their riders dismounting with the stiff movements of people who'd been riding for hours. 2 men and 1 woman, all wearing black leather vests with patches she couldn't quite read from this distance, all looking weathered and road-worn in a way that suggested they'd chosen this life deliberately. The woman was tall and lean with gray hair pulled back in a braid, maybe in her late 50s, moving with the easy confidence of someone who'd been riding bikes longer than Dakota had been alive. One of the men was massive, easily 6 feet 4 inches, and built like he could lift a Harley with one hand, with a thick beard going white and a gentle way of handling his motorcycle that contradicted his intimidating size. The other man was shorter, wiry, with dark skin and close-cropped hair, checking his bike's oil with practiced efficiency. They were clearly together, clearly a unit, and Dakota's first instinct was to stay far away from them, because her mother had warned her about motorcycle people, about how they were dangerous and unpredictable and not the kind of folks you wanted to get mixed up with. But as Dakota watched them fuel their bikes and talk quietly among themselves, as she saw the woman laugh at something the big man said, and saw the way the smaller man clapped his brother on the shoulder with easy affection, she reconsidered. These people looked tired but not mean, looked weathered but not cruel, and more importantly, they looked like the kind of people who'd made deliberate choices about how to live and who they wanted to be. The woman noticed Dakota first, probably because women always notice kids standing alone in parking lots at night, probably because maternal instinct doesn't shut off just because you ride a Harley instead of driving a minivan. She said something to her companions and started walking toward Dakota with slow, non-threatening steps, her hands visible and empty, her face arranged in an expression of gentle concern. The girl saw her coming and stood very straight, preparing whatever story she'd need to tell, but when the woman got close enough to really see her, to see the tears Dakota hadn't realized were sliding down her face and the way her small hands were clenched so tight her knuckles had gone white, she stopped and crouched down to Dakota's eye level without getting too close, giving the child space and choice about what happened next. The woman's name was Sarah Crow Mackenzie, though everyone called her Crow, and she'd been riding with the Desert Kings Motorcycle Club out of Phoenix for 23 years, ever since her husband died, and she'd decided that grief was best processed at 70 miles per hour with the wind in your face and brothers who understood that healing wasn't linear. She was 58 years old, a retired ER nurse who'd seen enough trauma to recognize it instantly in a child's eyes. And the girl, standing at this gas pump, had trauma written all over her, from the too careful way she held herself to the old bruise on her left forearm that looked like finger marks to the backpack that was packed, like someone who'd been told to grab only essentials. Crow had 3 grown children of her own and 6 grandchildren, had worked pediatric emergency medicine for 15 years before burnout forced her into retirement, and every instinct she'd ever developed was screaming that this child was in trouble and needed help, and needed it from someone who would believe her and act without judgment. Crow spoke quietly, her voice pitched to carry concern without alarm. "Hey there, sweetheart. You doing okay? You look like maybe you could use some help." Dakota opened her mouth to deliver the lie she'd prepared, the story about her dad inside paying for gas and her just waiting out here because she liked the night air, but what came out instead was the truth, sudden and unstoppable. "My stepfather left me here. He drove away and he's not coming back, and I don't have a phone and I can't call my mom and I don't know what to do." The words tumbled out in a rush, and then Dakota was crying for real, not the silent tears from before, but proper sobs that shook her whole small frame, and Crow moved closer, not touching yet, but present, solid, an anchor point in a moment that had tilted completely sideways. Behind Crow, the 2 men had noticed the situation and were approaching slowly, reading the scene, understanding without being told that this was delicate and required care. The big man was Thomas Bear Martinez, 52 years old, former Army Ranger and current president of the Desert Kings Phoenix chapter, a man whose size made children nervous until they realized he moved like he was afraid of breaking things, who spoke softly and listened hard, and who had a daughter about this girl's age, which meant he knew exactly how terrified a child had to be to trust strangers at a truck stop at night. The other man was James Quick Rivera, 46, former paramedic and the club's road captain, who'd seen enough emergencies to know this one needed immediate action and careful handling. Crow held up one hand to her brothers, a gesture that meant, "Hold position, give me space, let me handle this." And they stopped where they were, maintaining a protective perimeter without crowding the frightened child. Dakota told them everything through her tears, told them about Rick, who'd married her mother and decided Dakota was surplus inventory, told them about the drive from Albuquerque and the moment she'd realized he wasn't joking about leaving her, told them about her little brother and her mother who was barely functional most days, and the foster care system that would swallow both kids if anyone official found out about this. Told them about the $4 in her pocket and the grandmother in Truth or Consequences who didn't have a phone and probably didn't know Dakota existed because Rick had forbidden contact with her mother's family. Crow listened without interrupting, without dismissing, without any of the adult responses that Dakota had learned to expect, responses that minimized or explained away or suggested she was being dramatic. When the girl finally ran out of words, Crow asked one simple question. "What do you need, honey? Not what do you think we should do or what seems reasonable, but what do you actually need right now?" Dakota wiped her face with her sleeve and said something that broke all 3 bikers' hearts. "I need to get to my grandma's house without anyone calling the police or child services. I need to not destroy what's left of my family. I need someone to believe that I know what's best even though I'm 11. I need help, but I need it to be the kind of help that doesn't make everything worse." The three Desert Kings looked at each other, a whole conversation happening in glances and slight nods, a discussion about risk and liability and the fact that what this child was asking them to do was technically kidnapping and definitely illegal and absolutely the right thing. Bear spoke first, his deep voice gentle despite his size. "Where does your grandmother live?" "Truth or consequences," Dakota said. "It's about 94 miles south. Do you know the address?" Dakota shook her head. "But I know the house. It's yellow with a green door, and there's a garden with these tall sunflowers, and it's on a street called Pershing, and the neighbors have a dog named Buster who barks at everyone except my grandma." Quick pulled out his phone, typed rapidly, studied the screen. Truth or consequences, New Mexico, Pershing Avenue. How many yellow houses with green doors can there be? He looked at Bear and Crow. "It's doable. 94 miles. We can make it in under 2 hours if we push it." Crow was already shaking her head. "We can't just put her on the back of a bike and ride off into the night. We need to call someone. We need to." She stopped because Dakota had grabbed her arm, small fingers digging in with desperate strength. "Please don't call anyone, please. If you call, they'll take me and Mateo and my mom will lose us and Rick will disappear and I'll have destroyed everything. I just need to get to my grandma. She'll know what to do. She always knows what to do." Crow looked at this child who'd been forced to become an adult too soon, who was thinking about consequences and systems and family preservation instead of just crying for help, and she made a decision that probably violated a dozen laws and definitely aligned with every value she'd ever held. "Okay, honey, we're going to get you to your grandmother, but we're going to do it smart and safe." They spent 15 minutes making a plan. Bear went inside and bought a prepaid phone with cash, activated it, and gave Quick the number. Crow helped Dakota use the truck stop bathroom, got her a hot chocolate and a sandwich from the diner, because the girl admitted she hadn't eaten since lunch, and it was now past 10 at night. Quick mapped 3 different routes to truth or consequences, choosing the one that avoided major highways in towns with significant police presence. They gave Dakota a helmet that was too big, a spare leather jacket that hung to her knees, and strict instructions about holding on tight and leaning with the bike and trusting Crow completely. The Desert Kings operated under a code that included protecting the vulnerable, and this scared kid at a truck stop qualified as vulnerable by anyone's definition. They also operated under a code that said you didn't leave brothers or family behind, and Dakota had just become family the moment she'd asked for help. Dakota climbed onto the back of Crow's bike at 10:23 that Tuesday night, her small arms wrapped around a stranger's waist, her backpack secured in a saddlebag, and all her hope invested in 3 people she'd known for less than an hour. Crow felt the girl's grip tighten as the engine rumbled to life, felt her flinch at the noise and vibration, and then steady as Crow pulled slowly out of the parking lot with Bear and Quick flanking them in formation. They rode south on Highway 60 through desert darkness, 3 Harleys moving through the New Mexico night with a cargo more precious than any of them had carried before, and Dakota pressed her face against Crow's back and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. The desert at night was a different world than Dakota had ever experienced. Through the visor of the oversized helmet, she watched the landscape blur past in shades of black and silver, saw distant mountains outlined against a sky so full of stars it looked like someone had spilled light across velvet. The motorcycle's engine created a constant rumble that she could feel in her chest, a vibration that was simultaneously terrifying and oddly comforting, like being held by something powerful that had chosen to be gentle. Crow kept the speed reasonable, never pushing past 65 even when the road was empty and straight, checking her mirrors constantly to make sure Dakota was secure, occasionally reaching back to pat the girl's knee in reassurance. Bear rode ahead, his massive frame somehow graceful on the bike, leading them through turns and past the occasional vehicle with the confidence of someone who'd ridden these roads 1,000 times. Quick brought up the rear, maintaining position, watching for any problems, ready to respond if anything went wrong. They'd been riding for maybe 40 minutes when Dakota realized she'd stopped being afraid. Somewhere between the truck stop and this endless stretch of highway, her panic had transformed into something else, a strange calm that came from having made a decision and committed to it completely. She was on the back of a motorcycle being ridden by a woman she'd met an hour ago, heading toward a grandmother's house she'd only visited twice, trusting three strangers who wore leather and patches and who looked nothing like the kind of people adults told children to trust. And yet somehow, this felt safer than anything else in her life had felt in the past 14 months, safer than her stepfather's house where she walked on eggshells, safer than her mother's anxiety that filled every room like smoke, safer than the systems designed to help children that Dakota knew would only make things worse. They stopped once at a closed gas station just outside Elephant Butte, pulling into the dark parking lot so Dakota could use the bathroom behind the building and stretch legs that had gone stiff from gripping the bike. Crow gave her a granola bar and more water, crouched down to check that she was okay, really okay, not just pretending. How you holding up, sweetheart? The girl's face was pale in the moonlight but determined. I'm okay. My legs are tired and my hands hurt from holding on, but I'm okay. How much further? Maybe 30 more minutes. You're doing great, honey. You're being so brave. Dakota shook her head. I'm not brave. Brave is when you're not scared. I'm terrified. Crow smiled, a gentle expression that transformed her weathered face. Baby, brave is being terrified and doing it anyway. Brave is asking for help when you need it. Brave is trusting your instincts when every adult in your life has failed you. You're the bravest person I've met in a long time. Bear approached with the prepaid phone, holding it out to Dakota. We need to call your grandmother. We can't just show up at her house at midnight with you on the back of a motorcycle without warning. She'll think we're kidnapping you. She'll call the police before we can explain. Do you know her number? Dakota's face fell. No, I never memorized it. It was just in my mom's phone and Rick wouldn't let me call her anyway. Do you know her full name? We can try to find a number online. Juanita Martinez. But she might not be listed. She doesn't really use phones much. She says they're for emergencies only. Quick was already typing on his phone, scrolling through search results. Juanita Martinez, Truth or Consequences, Pershing Avenue. He showed them the screen, found her, listed with a landline. Want me to call or do you want to? Dakota took the phone with shaking hands. I should do it. She's going to be confused and scared and she needs to hear my voice. The phone rang 4 times before a woman's voice answered, heavy with sleep and concern because nobody called at this hour unless something was wrong. Hello? Who is this? Grandma, it's Dakota. There was a sharp intake of breath, then rapid Spanish that Dakota only partially understood, her grandmother's first language emerging in moments of stress. Mija, where are you? What's happened? Are you hurt? Slow down, Grandma. I'm okay. I'm safe. But I need your help. Rick left me at a truck stop near Elephant Butte. He drove away and he's not coming back. Some people found me, good people, bikers, and they're bringing me to your house. We'll be there in maybe 30 minutes. Please don't call the police. Please just let them bring me to you. Juanita Martinez was 73 years old and had raised 5 children, including Dakota's mother, had survived a husband who drank and a daughter who'd made bad choices, and a lifetime of being told that her circumstances defined her worth. She'd also learned that when children called asking for help, you helped first and asked questions later. I'll be waiting, Juanita said, her voice steady now, the initial panic controlled. I'll have the porch light on. You tell these people who are helping you that I'm grateful and that they're welcome in my home. Dakota's voice broke. Thank you, Grandma. I didn't know what else to do. You did exactly right, Mija. You asked for help from people who could give it. That's wisdom, not weakness. I'll see you soon. Dakota handed the phone back to Quick, wiping her eyes again, trying to hold herself together for just a little longer. Crow put an arm around her shoulders. Your grandmother sounds like a strong woman. She is. She raised my mom by herself after my grandpa died. Mom says Grandma is the toughest person she knows. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, Crow said quietly. You're pretty tough yourself, asking strangers for help, telling them exactly what you need, holding it together through all of this. Your grandmother taught you well, even if you didn't live with her. They mounted up again and rode the final 30 miles through darkness that was starting to show the first hints of dawn at the eastern horizon. Truth or consequences appeared gradually, a scattering of lights that became streets that became neighborhoods, and Dakota directed them through turns she remembered from previous visits until they pulled onto Pershing Avenue, and she pointed at the yellow house with the green door and the tall sunflowers that were just visible in the glow from the porch light. An elderly woman stood on the porch, wrapped in a robe, and the moment the motorcycle stopped, she was down the steps, and Dakota was off the bike and running toward her, the two of them colliding in an embrace that was part relief, part release, part homecoming. Juanita held her granddaughter and looked over the child's head at the three bikers who'd brought her home, these strangers who'd done something risky and illegal and completely right. She walked toward them, still holding Dakota's hand, her free hand extended in greeting. "Thank you. I don't know your names or where you came from or why you helped my granddaughter, but thank you for seeing her when she needed to be seen, for believing her when she needed to be believed, for bringing her home when she needed a home to come to." Crow shook the offered hand. "I'm Sarah Mackenzie. People call me Crow. This is Thomas Martinez. We call him Bear. And James Rivera. We call him Quick. We're Desert Kings Motorcycle Club out of Phoenix. Your granddaughter was stranded at a truck stop and she asked for help and we gave it. That's what we do." Juanita studied them, these leather-clad strangers who'd ridden 94 miles through the night to deliver a frightened child to safety. And she saw what Dakota had seen, the code they lived by, the honor they carried, the deliberate choice they'd made to be the kind of people who helped when help was needed. "You'll come inside. I'll make coffee. Dakota will need to eat something proper and you'll need to tell me everything so I know how to help her." It wasn't a question. Bear started to protest, to say they'd done their part and should head back, but Juanita cut him off with a look that reminded him powerfully of his own grandmother, who'd raised him and who'd also had the ability to communicate volumes without speaking. "You'll come inside," she repeated, and they came inside. The house was small and clean and full of the kind of warmth that came from decades of love and care. Photographs covering every surface, handmade quilts on the furniture, the smell of something that might have been bread-baked earlier that day. Juanita set Dakota at the kitchen table with leftover pozole that she heated in a pan while she made coffee for the adults, and over the next hour, the story emerged in pieces. Dakota explained about Rick and the abandonment and her desperate need to avoid official intervention. The Desert Kings explained about finding her at the truck stop and making the decision to bring her here instead of calling authorities. Juanita listened to all of it, asked questions, formulated a plan with the kind of decisive certainty that came from years of dealing with systems that didn't work and family members who did stupid things. "I'll call my daughter in the morning," Juanita said. "I'll tell her Dakota is here and safe. I'll tell her that Rick abandoned her child and that this situation requires immediate action. My daughter will file for divorce. She'll file for a restraining order. She'll get her son away from that man, and she'll bring him here where I can help her raise both children properly." She looked at Dakota. "You'll stay with me while this gets sorted out. You'll go to school here. You'll be safe here. I should have insisted on this a year ago when that man came into your lives, but I let your mother make her own choices, and I was wrong. Sometimes mothers need their mothers to step in, and I'm stepping in now." Crow reached across the table and squeezed Juanita's hand. "We need to be clear about something. What we did tonight, bringing Dakota here without calling authorities, that was illegal. If someone wanted to make trouble for us, they could. We're willing to face those consequences if necessary, but you need to know that protecting Dakota might mean dealing with some official questions." Juanita's expression hardened. "Anyone who wants to make trouble for people who helped my granddaughter will have to go through me first, and I've been fighting systems and bureaucrats and men who thought they knew better than me for 50 years. I'm not worried." Bear smiled despite himself. "I believe that, ma'am. I genuinely believe that." They stayed until the sky outside showed real light, until Dakota had eaten and bathed and fallen asleep in the spare bedroom that Juanita kept ready for grandchildren, until the three Desert Kings had given Juanita every phone number and piece of contact information she might need, until they were satisfied that this child was truly safe, and this grandmother was truly capable of protecting her. As they prepared to leave, Juanita walked them to their bikes and pressed something into Crow's hand. Cash, maybe $60 in small bills, for gas, for the ride home, for the next child who needs help. Crow tried to refuse, but Juanita wouldn't hear it. "You gave me back my granddaughter. You rode 94 miles to bring her to safety. You trusted an old woman to do right by her child. This is nothing compared to that gift, but it's what I have to give and I'm giving it. The three bikers rode away from that yellow house as the sun rose over New Mexico, and none of them spoke for the first hour of the journey back to Phoenix. They were processing what they'd done, the risk they'd taken, the laws they'd broken, the rightness of it all, despite the potential consequences. Finally, Bear broke the silence through the communication system they used on long rides. We're going to face some heat for this. If Dakota's stepfather reports her missing, if someone figures out what we did, we could be looking at serious charges. Quick's voice came through calm and steady. Then we faced them. We did the right thing. I'll stand by that in any court, Crow added her own thought. That child needed help and we gave it. That grandmother needed her granddaughter and we brought them together. Everything else is just details. Over the following weeks, the situation unfolded exactly as Juanita had predicted. Dakota's mother, Rebecca, received a phone call that her daughter was safe with her grandmother and that her husband had abandoned the child at a truck stop. The initial shock gave way to fury, then to action. Rebecca filed for divorce, filed for a restraining order, took her son and moved into her mother's house, and began the process of rebuilding a life that didn't include a man who could abandon a child. Rick was eventually located in California, claimed he'd thought Dakota was still in the car, offered excuses that nobody believed, and faced charges that included child endangerment and abandonment. The Desert Kings were questioned by local police, admitted what they'd done, and prepared for consequences that never materialized because Juanita and Rebecca both testified that the bikers had saved Dakota from a dangerous situation and had acted with the child's best interests as their only motivation. 6 months later, on a Saturday afternoon in March, the Desert Kings Phoenix chapter held their annual charity ride for children's services, an event that drew hundreds of bikers and raised thousands of dollars for programs that helped at-risk youth. Among the participants was a small family, a grandmother, a mother, 2 children, and they stood at the starting line holding a banner that read, "Thank you, Desert Kings, for bringing our family home." When Crow saw them, she stopped her bike and dismounted, walked over to Dakota, who was now 12 and looked healthier and happier than she'd been at that truck stop 6 months ago, and she pulled the girl into a hug that said everything words couldn't. "How are you doing, sweetheart?" Dakota smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "I'm good. Really good. I'm living with Grandma and Mom and Mateo. Mom got a job at the hospital. I'm doing better in school. Mateo doesn't have nightmares anymore. Everything is better." She paused. "I wanted to tell you something. What you did that night, believing me and helping me and not calling the police, even though that would have been easier, you saved more than just me. You saved my whole family. If you'd called authorities, if I'd gone into the system, Mom would have lost both of us and she wouldn't have had a reason to leave. Rick and Mateo would still be in danger and everything would have fallen apart. But you trusted me to know what I needed, and you gave it to me. And because of that, we're all together and we're all safe." Crow felt her throat tighten. "You saved yourself, honey. You were brave enough to ask for help. We just gave you a ride." Dakota shook her head. "You did more than that. You saw me when I needed to be seen. You believed me when I needed to be believed. You treated me like I mattered, and that made all the difference." Juanita stepped forward, embracing Crow with the fierce gratitude of a grandmother who'd gotten her family back. "My granddaughter talks about you constantly, about the woman on the motorcycle who listened, about how you didn't dismiss her or minimize what she was feeling or tell her she was too young to know what she needed, about how you trusted her judgment. She wants to be like you when she grows up." The Desert Kings added something to their mission after that night at the truck stop. They started a program called Seen and Heard, teaching chapters across the Southwest to watch for children in distress, to listen when kids asked for help, to trust that even young people often knew what they needed better than the systems designed to help them. They partnered with grandparents raising grandchildren, with families escaping domestic violence, with anyone trying to protect kids from situations that the official channels couldn't or wouldn't address quickly enough. Over the following years, the Desert Kings intervened in 14 more situations where children signaled for help, and each time they operated under the same principle that had guided them with Dakota. Listen to the child. Believe the child. Do what's necessary to keep the child safe. Dakota grew up in her grandmother's yellow house with the green door, graduated high school with honors, went to college on scholarships that the Desert Kings helped her apply for, and studied social work because she wanted to be the kind of person who helped kids the way Crow had helped her. When she turned 21, she showed up at the Desert Kings clubhouse with a request. She wanted to become an honorary member, wanted to wear a patch that marked her as family, wanted to be part of the organization that had saved her life by simply believing her when she said she knew what she needed. Crow pinned the patch on personally, a custom design that showed a yellow house with a green door and the words "Family Found," and Dakota wore it with the same pride that the full members wore theirs. Years later, when Dakota was 26 and working as a child advocate, she received a call about a case that sounded familiar. A girl, 11 years old, abandoned at a rest stop by a step-parent, found by a truck driver who wanted to do the right thing but didn't know how to help without involving authorities that might make things worse. Dakota drove to that rest stop, sat with that frightened child, listened to what she needed, and then made phone calls to a grandmother who was waiting, to bikers who would ride without asking questions, to a network of people who understood that sometimes the right help looked different than the official help. And as she watched the girl ride away on the back of a motorcycle toward safety, toward family, toward the grandmother who would protect her, Dakota thought about a Tuesday night 6 months after her 11th birthday when she'd made the same journey, and how that single act of being seen and believed had changed the entire trajectory of her life. The story of Dakota and the Desert Kings became something of a legend in the motorcycle community, a reminder that the patches on their backs meant something beyond rebellion or belonging, meant a commitment to being the kind of people who showed up when vulnerable folks needed them, who trusted their instincts about when to follow rules and when to follow conscience, who understood that sometimes the most important rides weren't the ones to rallies or parties, but the ones that brought frightened children home. And every year on the anniversary of that September night, Crow rode to Truth or Consequences, to a yellow house with a green door, and shared a meal with a family she'd helped save by simply choosing to believe a child who said she knew what she needed. Because that was the truth that Dakota had taught them all, that children often understood their situations better than adults gave them credit for, that being seen and believed was sometimes the most powerful intervention possible. That family wasn't always the one you were born into, but sometimes the one you found at truck stops and on motorcycles and in moments of desperate trust. And that the willingness to listen, really listen, to what a child was saying could be the difference between a family destroyed and a family saved, between a child lost in the system and a child brought home, between following the rules that seemed right and doing the thing that was right even when it broke every rule in the book.